Now, protests by university students have a notable history, of course, in the United States and right around the world. And we've seen them before on some of these very same campuses, particularly, you'll remember, during the Vietnam War. Some were peaceful, like the demonstration at Columbia University in 1970. Others were more confrontational, even violent, like that at Kent State in 1970. David Farber is a U.S. history professor at the University of Kansas, and he joins us now. Before we get into some of this history, could you please educate us on the fact that most of these student protests, right, these movements over the decades, they're about affecting change, right? Have they been successful at that?
That's the toughest question, isn't it? I think when you look back all the way some 60 years to what happened in the United States during the Vietnam War era, you could say yes. The protests often started small. They were often dismissed as marginal folks, kooks, crazy people. But that anti-war movement did catch fire, and students played a major role in it. And eventually, the tide turned against the war in Vietnam in U.S. public opinion. So while it wasn't an easy road, it wasn't a simple path, I think it's fair to say that students and the larger anti-war movement, at least then, they made a difference. You could say the same about the 1970s and 80s when students helped lead the way in fighting apartheid by creating, not unlike what we're seeing today, shanty towns they were called then, or campus tents being put up on campus grounds to try to say, universities, please lead the way, disinvest from South Africa. So students have had a role to play in American politics.
Yeah, and certainly the brave souls that led a lot of the civil rights protests as well. I think what many are wondering here is what is the difference now? Now, I will say during the Vietnam War, many students had, and you'll pardon the expression, skin in the game, right? Many of their, if they weren't being sent to war, many of their friends or family members were being sent to a war they didn't agree with. But when we look at it now, Professor Farber, why is there such a difficult time at this historical point that we find ourselves in, but trying to delineate that freedom of expression and that empowerment to actually affect change with the rights of everyone else? And in some cases, other people being discriminated against and worse in terms of, what they believe or who they support.
Yeah, you've put your nail right on it. This is the hardest question. How do you balance the rights all Americans enjoy to freedom of speech, freedom of assembly?
Go ahead. We can hear
Sorry?
you. No, we can go ahead.
Okay,
We can hear you.
gotcha. I was just saying you're right that the balance is difficult to walk through. I think what we're seeing right now is students trying to find their own line between disruption, which universities have a right to stop, and freedom of assembly and freedom of speech, which students, certainly on public universities, have a right to enjoy. So, it's a tough decision too. Are these protests furthering the cause? Are people in the United States watching this and saying, "Oh, those young people have it right"? I think the more angry, the more violent, certainly when they cross the line into anti-Semitism, which a small minority have done, you're going to have a hard time persuading Americans that this is the right way to go, to turn against our longtime ally and support Hamas in Gaza. So, these are very difficult questions. I don't envy university presidents trying to find that line between two contrasting rights.
Yeah, I don't have a lot of time left, but do you believe this will be a generational divide as well between, people on college campuses and also, those of us with kids at college who are thinking, okay, we don't want you to get in any trouble here, although perhaps they really do viscerally believe in what they're protesting about?
It's a tough one, isn't it? And I think what we're seeing right now is a new generation who are watching, in some ways, the polarization in American society, the divide between politicians over what America's role in the world should be. They're trying to find their own voice in that conversation. And I think we're going to see some very hard questions ahead about U.S. policy in the Middle East and indeed around the world.
Professor Farber, we will leave it there, but I really thank you for the perspective. It's an important one. Appreciate it.